She always believed her twins died in a Christmas Eve fire, leaving her with grief and trauma no mother should ever have to bear. But 6 years later, at the airport, she sees something that changes everything. Jane Matthews pulled her car to the side of the deserted road in suburban Colorado. She sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, staring at the empty plot of land ahead. 6 years had passed since she'd lost everything on this very spot, but the ache in her chest felt just as fresh as it had been that Christmas Eve night. The morning air was crisp as she stepped out of her car, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. She'd made this pilgrimage every year since the fire, a ritual of remembrance she couldn't bring herself to abandon. The land was barren now, not a trace of the charred Victorian house that once stood there. All the rubble had been cleared years ago, leaving nothing but memories and ghosts. Jane pulled her coat tighter around her body as she walked across what had once been her front yard. This land had been in her family for generations. Her grandparents had built the house, her parents had raised her here, and she had brought her twin daughters home to this very spot. "I should have rebuilt years ago," she whispered to herself, watching her breath form clouds in the cold December air. She stopped at what would have been the center of the house and closed her eyes. The memories came flooding back. The smoke, the heat, the screams. It had been a quiet Christmas Eve, after her husband Royce had divorced her, while she was in the end stages of her pregnancy. She'd had a small gathering with friends that evening, but after they left, she'd fallen asleep in her bedroom and her twin daughters in their nursery. She woke to flames already engulfing half the house. The firefighters had pulled her out, but she remembered struggling against them, screaming for her babies. By the time the fire was extinguished, the nursery was nothing but ash. The twins' bassinet had melted completely, the remains inside too badly burned to be identified through DNA testing. The police and fire department determined that a faulty old heater in the nursery had caused the blaze. Jane took a deep breath, forcing the memories back into their compartment. "They're in heaven now," she murmured to herself, the mantra she'd repeated for 6 years. "There's nothing I can do." The sound of tires on gravel pulled her from her thoughts. Jane turned to see a sleek black SUV pulling up behind her car. A tall man with salt and pepper hair stepped out, his expression concerned but warm. "Thought I might find you here," Robert Nelson said, hands tucked into the pockets of his expensive coat. Jane smiled weakly at her colleague and manager from Colorado Luxury Properties. "Am I that predictable?" "Only to those who know you well," he replied, walking over to stand beside her. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Jane said automatically, then sighed. "Actually, I've finally made up my mind, Robert. I'm going to sell this land." Robert raised his eyebrows. "You're sure? After all these years of debating?" "It's time. I can't keep clinging to this place. With the money from the sale and what I've saved, I can finally start my own business." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "You know, with what you've saved, you could rebuild here, use it for your business or rent it out." Jane shook her head firmly. "I don't want to be entangled with this place anymore. The memories are too painful. And honestly, after seeing so many cases of careless renters in our line of work..." She trailed off. "I understand," Robert said softly. "You're probably right about the renters anyway. We've certainly seen our share of horror stories." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking at the empty space where a home once stood. Jane had known Robert since before the twins were born. He'd been her rock through everything: the divorce, the difficult pregnancy, and the aftermath of the fire. Their friendship had never developed into anything more romantic, despite their obvious compatibility. Jane simply couldn't move on, not with the weight of her loss still so heavy on her heart. "I still remember when I first got pregnant," Jane said quietly. "Royce wanted me to give up my career, become a full-time mother. When I refused him, he filed for divorce. I was 5 months along with the twins." Robert nodded, having heard the story before but listening patiently anyway. "Thank God I signed that prenup and kept my job," Jane continued. "Even with my salary, taking care of twins alone was more expensive than I ever imagined, especially with my medical condition making it impossible to breastfeed. Those specialty formulas cost a fortune." "You did the right thing," Robert assured her. You stood your ground, kept your independence. That's the Jane I've always admired. Jane smiled gratefully at him. So I'll get the paperwork started on selling this place. Can you have the team prepare the advertising materials? Of course, Robert said. I'd handle it personally, but I'm actually heading out of state today, visiting a high-end property in Utah for a client. Today? You didn't mention that, Jane said, surprised. Last-minute thing. I'll be gone for 3 days, part work, part unwinding. It's been a hectic few months. He hesitated, then added with a casual tone that didn't quite mask his hopefulness, You could come with me, you know. Might do you good to get away for a few days. Jane started to automatically decline, then stopped herself. Maybe a change of scenery was exactly what she needed after making this decision. You know what? I think I will. It has been a long time since I've been anywhere. I could help with the client meeting too. Robert's face lit up. Perfect. We can meet at the airport in 2 hours. Flight leaves at noon. I'll be there, Jane promised. Robert checked his watch. I should get going. Need to finish packing. Wait, you came all the way out here even though you're traveling today? Jane asked. Robert shrugged. You said you wanted to meet about the property. It was important to you. I could have rescheduled if I'd known. Don't worry about it, he said with a warm smile. Pack light, wear something comfortable. We'll still be meeting the client tomorrow. They walked back to their respective cars, and Jane felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Perhaps this decision to sell, to finally let go, was the first step toward healing. I won't be late, she called to Robert as she opened her car door. I know you won't, he replied with a smile, before getting into his SUV and driving away. Jane looked back at the empty lot one last time before starting her car. 6 years of grief and indecision, finally coming to an end. It was time to move forward. Jane's apartment was quiet as she moved methodically through her packing routine. The modern one-bedroom in downtown Denver was a far cry from her family home, minimalist, functional, and without many personal touches, just like her life had become since the fire. She pulled a small suitcase from her closet and laid it open on her bed. 3 days in Utah. Business casual for the client meeting, comfortable warm clothes for travel. She packed efficiently, her mind still processing her decision to sell the land. It's the right choice, she said aloud to her empty apartment. That chapter is closed. There was relief in the finality of it, mixed with an undercurrent of melancholy. That land had been her connection to her parents, her childhood, and most painfully to Millie and Daphne. But the truth was, that connection had been severed the night of the fire. Whatever new building rose on that plot couldn't restore what was lost. Jane zipped her suitcase and was about to head out when something stopped her. She walked to her dresser and opened the bottom drawer, the one she rarely touched. Inside was a small wooden box containing the few mementos she'd managed to salvage after the fire. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, among other keepsakes, was an acrylic keychain with a photograph of her twins. They were only a month old in the picture, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep. Below the photo were their names, birth date, and weights. Millie Elizabeth Matthews, 5 pounds 3 ounces, and Daphne Grace Matthews, 5 pounds 7 ounces. Born May 10th, 6 years ago. Jane had ordered the keychain shortly after their birth, but had never attached it to her keys. It had felt too precious for everyday use. Now, after a moment's hesitation, she clipped it to the zipper of her purse. Time to keep you closer, she whispered to the image of her daughters. She looked around her apartment one last time, making sure everything was in order. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. On my way to the airport. See you soon. Jane replied quickly, gathered her belongings and headed out. As she drove to Denver International Airport, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of anticipation, perhaps even hope. At the airport, she found Robert waiting at the designated meeting spot, his own small suitcase beside him. Perfect timing, he said with a smile. I just got a message from the office. They've already started working on the advertising materials for your property. That was fast, Jane remarked. I responded to their email on the way here. Everything's set in motion. The team knows a good listing when they see one. That location will sell quickly. They made their way through security and to the gate. As they settled into their seats on the plane, Jane found herself genuinely looking forward to the trip. It was just business, of course, but it felt good to have something different to focus on, something other than grief and memories. The flight to Salt Lake City was short and uneventful. Jane spent most of it reviewing the property details Robert had shared with her, while he caught up on emails beside her. The plane touched down at Salt Lake City International Airport with a gentle bump. Jane and Robert gathered their carry-on luggage and joined the stream of passengers disembarking. The modern terminal was bustling with pre-Christmas travelers, families reuniting, business people hurrying to make connections, holiday decorations adding festive splashes of color everywhere. "The client is picking us up tomorrow morning," Robert explained, as they walked through the jet bridge connector into the main terminal. "So we have the rest of today to settle in and prepare." Jane nodded, adjusting the strap of her purse where the twins' keychain now hung. "Which hotel are we staying at again?" "The Grand Summit. It's about 20 minutes from here." They continued through the terminal, riding the travelator that would take them toward the baggage claim area. Jane gazed absently through the glass windows that overlooked the lower level of the airport. That's when she saw them. Two little girls in matching pink winter coats were playing near the large windows by the baggage claim area. They looked about 6 years old, with honey blonde hair in identical ponytails. One was spinning in circles while the other tried to catch her, both giggling with the pure, unbridled joy of childhood. Jane smiled involuntarily at their antics. The girls were obviously drawing attention. Several travelers passing by were smiling at their exuberance. "Those girls are adorable," Jane remarked to Robert, pointing them out. Robert followed her gaze and nodded. They seemed to be having the time of their lives. "From their outfits, they must come from money," Jane observed. "Probably here on a family holiday." Jane looked around for the girl's guardian, curious about who was responsible for these lively twins. Her eyes found a woman standing a few feet behind them, elegant in an expensive-looking wool coat, her silver hair styled in a perfect bob. Jane froze. One of the little girls jumped onto a large blue suitcase and perched there triumphantly, laughing and raising her hands in the air like she'd conquered a mountain. The world seemed to stop spinning. Jane felt her breath catch in her throat as recognition dawned. The woman watching the girls was Lucia Calloway, her former mother-in-law. Without thinking, Jane tried to step backward on the moving travelator. "Jane, what are you doing?" Robert called, grabbing her arm. I have to," she stammered, still trying to move against the direction of the travelator. "You can't go backward, there are people behind us," Robert said, his voice concerned. A man behind them muttered, "Lady, what's your problem?" while someone else made a louder, ruder comment about airport etiquette. Jane reluctantly stopped fighting against the movement, her heart pounding as the travelator carried her farther from the scene. The moment they reached the end, she darted off and began hurrying back on foot. "Jane," Robert called, rushing after her, "what's going on?" She didn't slow down until she reached the spot where she could look down at the baggage claim area again. Her eyes frantically searched the crowd. "Jane," Robert said again, catching up to her, "talk to me. Did you recognize someone down there?" "It's Lucia," Jane whispered, her voice shaking. "Royce's mother, my ex-mother-in-law." Robert's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Are you sure?" "Positive. And those girls?" Jane's voice trailed off, unable to verbalize the impossible thought forming in her mind. "The twins?" Robert asked gently. "Jane, that can't be. Your daughters died in the fire." Jane pressed her hands against the glass, still searching. "They're the right age, twin girls, with Lucia." "Maybe she's traveling with friends who have twin daughters," Robert suggested reasonably. "Or relatives. I don't see Royce anywhere, do you?" Jane scanned the crowded baggage claim area, looking for her ex-husband's tall figure and distinctive dark hair, but didn't spot him. She tried to steady her breathing, to think rationally. "You're right," she admitted. "It's probably a coincidence. It has to be." But something deep inside her wasn't convinced. She lingered for several minutes, watching Lucia and the girls as they collected their luggage from the carousel. "We should go," Robert finally said, checking his watch. "We'll pass by that baggage claim area on our way out. You can get a closer look then." Jane nodded reluctantly and followed him toward the escalators. As they descended, her mind raced with possibilities, most of them impossible, all of them unsettling. Why would Lucia be in Salt Lake City with twin girls? Could they possibly be her daughters? But she had seen the aftermath of the fire with her own eyes. The police had confirmed the remains found were human. It couldn't be them, it just couldn't. But as they approached the baggage claim area, Jane couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She was determined to get a closer look at those girls, perhaps even speak to Lucia, no matter how uncomfortable that encounter might be. By the time Jane and Robert reached the baggage claim area, the spot where she had seen Lucia and the twin girls was empty. Jane felt a mixture of disappointment and relief, part of her desperately wanted confirmation, while another part feared what that confirmation might mean. "They must have moved on," Robert said, glancing around the busy area. Jane wasn't ready to give up. "Let's check near the exits. They might be waiting for transportation." They made their way toward the arrival exit doors, where passengers typically gathered to await pickup. The crowded area made it difficult to spot anyone in particular, but then Jane caught a glimpse of Pink, the distinctive coats of the twin girls. They were standing in line near the doors, Lucia beside them, checking her phone. "There they are," Jane whispered to Robert, her heart racing. "I need to talk to her." "Jane, are you sure that's a good idea?" "I have to know, Robert. I'll just say hello, be polite. Maybe get a closer look at the girls." Before Robert could protest further, Jane was already making her way toward Lucia. As she approached, Lucia looked up from her phone and spotted her. The recognition was immediate. Lucia's perfectly maintained face shifted from neutral to tense in an instant. "Lucia," Jane said, forcing a smile, "what a surprise seeing you here." Lucia's lips tightened into what barely passed for a smile. "Jane, how unexpected." An awkward silence stretched between them. The twins had stopped their playing and were now staring curiously at Jane, their identical faces showing innocent interest in this stranger who knew their grandmother. "How have you been?" Jane asked, trying to sound casual, while her eyes darted repeatedly to the girls. "Well enough," Lucia replied coldly. "What brings you to Salt Lake City? I thought you never left Denver." "Business trip with my manager," Jane explained, gesturing vaguely behind her where Robert stood at a distance. "We're meeting a client tomorrow about a property." "Still at that real estate company, then?" Lucia's tone managed to make Jane's career sound like a regrettable hobby. "Yes, still at Colorado Luxury Properties. It's going well." Lucia's eyes narrowed slightly. "How nice that your career continues to be so fulfilling, especially during the holiday season. Most people would be home with their families a week before Christmas." The barb was deliberately aimed at Jane's childlessness, and it struck its target. Jane felt a flash of anger, quickly followed by confusion. If Lucia knew about the fire, why would she make such a cruel comment? "Actually, Lucia, I'm surprised you never reached out after the house fire," Jane said, watching carefully for the older woman's reaction. "Did Royce not tell you what happened?" Lucia's expression remained frustratingly unreadable. "Fire? What fire?" "6 years ago, on Christmas Eve, my house burned down. My daughters died in the fire," Jane said, the words still painful to speak aloud after all this time. A flicker of something, surprise, concern, calculation, passed across Lucia's face. "Really? So you won custody and then failed to keep them safe?" Her voice was harsh. "They should have stayed with Royce, not in that old house." Jane was taken aback by the callousness of the response. Surely a grandmother would show more grief at learning of her grandchildren's deaths, even if she had disliked their mother. Trying to change the subject, Jane glanced again at the twins, who were now whispering to each other. "Are you here on holiday with friends? Or did Mark finally settle down?" she asked, referring to Royce's younger brother. Lucia's posture stiffened further. "That's really none of your business, Jane. I was just making conversation." "Girls, the line is moving," Lucia interrupted, turning away from Jane. "We need to go." The twins obediently gathered closer to their grandmother, still stealing curious glances at Jane. One of them, the slightly taller one, whispered something to the other that made her giggle. Lucia pulled out her phone and began scrolling through it, a clear dismissal. Jane stood there for a moment longer, debating whether to press the issue, but the coldness of Lucia's demeanor made it clear that no more information would be forthcoming. "It was nice seeing you, Lucia," Jane said finally, her voice hollow. Lucia didn't look up from her phone, merely nodding curtly in acknowledgement. Jane reluctantly turned away and walked back to where Robert was waiting, her mind spinning with questions. Lucia's reaction had been strange, to say the least. Both her apparent ignorance about the fire and her lack of grief upon hearing about it didn't make sense. "That didn't go well," Robert observed as Jane rejoined him. "No," Jane agreed, her voice quiet. "It didn't, and something is very wrong." "She's still as cold as ever," Jane said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion, as they walked away from the baggage claim area. "She always disapproved of me, said I wasn't good enough for their precious family, just a working-class girl who didn't belong in their wealthy world." Robert guided her toward the exit, his hand supportive at her elbow. "What happened exactly?" "What did she say?" "That's the strange part," Jane replied, glancing back over her shoulder. "She acted like she didn't know about the fire or that the twins died. When I told her, she barely reacted, just made some snide comment about how I must have won custody and failed to keep them safe." "That doesn't make sense," Robert frowned. "Royce definitely knew about the fire, right?" "Of course he did. He even sent flowers to the memorial service, though he didn't attend. There's no way he wouldn't have told his mother. They were inseparable. He was the ultimate mommy's boy." They stepped outside into the crisp Utah air, joining the line for taxis. Jane couldn't stop thinking about Lucia's strange reaction. "And when I asked about the girls, she got defensive, said it was none of my business." Jane shook her head. "The normal reaction to hearing your grandchildren died would be distress, wouldn't it? Even if you hated their mother." "Absolutely," Robert agreed. "It's beyond strange." Jane suddenly grabbed Robert's arm. "Look!" Across the pickup lanes, a sleek black luxury car had pulled up. A uniformed driver emerged and opened the back door. Out stepped Royce Calloway, tall, immaculately dressed, and unmistakable even after 6 years. "It's him," Jane whispered, her grip on Robert's arm tightening. They watched as Royce greeted Lucia with a kiss on the cheek, then knelt down to embrace the twin girls, who ran to him excitedly. The family tableau was picture-perfect, wealthy, beautiful, and complete. Without thinking, Jane started forward, intent on confronting her ex-husband. Robert caught her arm, pulling her back. "Let me go," she hissed. "I need to talk to him." "Jane, stop and think," Robert urged. "If you confront him here, what's going to happen? They'll just drive away and you'll lose track of them completely." Jane paused, seeing the logic in Robert's words. "Then what do we do?" "We follow them," Robert said decisively. "Get in a taxi, maintain some distance, and see where they're going. That's our best chance of figuring out what's happening." Jane nodded, her racing heart slowing slightly. "You're right, let's go." They hurried to the front of the taxi line, where a driver was just opening his trunk for another passenger. "Excuse me," Robert called, approaching the next taxi in line. "We need your help." The middle-aged driver looked at them warily. "Where to?" "We need you to follow that black car," Jane said, pointing to Royce's luxury sedan. "The Lincoln, but keep your distance." The driver frowned. "Lady, this isn't a movie. I don't do that kind of thing." "Please," Jane begged. "I'll pay double your fare. It's important." "Is this dangerous?" the driver asked, his expression skeptical. "Because I'm not getting involved in anything illegal." "Nothing dangerous," Robert assured him. "We just need to see where they're going, that's all." The driver considered for a moment, then sighed. "Double fare up front." "And I'm turning around if anything looks suspicious." "Deal," Jane said immediately, pulling out her wallet. They climbed into the taxi, Jane's eyes never leaving the black Lincoln as Royce's driver loaded the luggage into the trunk. Soon, both vehicles were on the move. Jane and Robert's taxi maintaining a discreet distance behind Royce's car. "I'm sorry about this," Jane said to Robert as they left the airport behind. "You didn't sign up for family drama when you invited me along." "Don't apologize," Robert replied. "I'm glad I'm here with you." Jane looked at him gratefully. "I know you had plans tonight. You mentioned meeting the client for dinner." Robert looked surprised. "How did you know that?" "I didn't tell you." "You said we were meeting them tomorrow at the property site," Jane explained. "I assumed there was some preliminary meeting tonight." "Well, yes," Robert admitted. "Dinner at 8 o'clock, but I can reschedule. This is more important." Jane checked her watch. It was just past 3 p.m. "It's early still. Maybe we'll have this sorted by then." But as they continued to follow Royce's car, it became clear their destination wasn't nearby. The Lincoln headed away from downtown Salt Lake City toward the suburbs and eventually the outlying areas with larger, more secluded properties. "They're going pretty far out," the taxi driver commented after they'd been driving for almost an hour. "Your fare's adding up." "It's fine," Jane assured him, though she was beginning to worry about just how far they were going. The taxi's meter continued to climb as they followed Royce's car onto increasingly exclusive roads lined with grand houses set far back from the street. "I didn't expect them to come all this way," Robert murmured, checking his watch. "It's almost 4:30 now." Jane nodded, her eyes fixed on the Lincoln ahead. "We've come too far to turn back now." Finally, Royce's car turned through an ornate gate into a long, tree-lined driveway leading to an impressive mansion. The taxi stopped a distance away on the main road. "That's as far as I go," the driver announced. "Can't follow them onto private property." "That's fine," Jane said, fumbling for her wallet. She handed him double the amount on the meter, as promised. "Thank you for your help." The driver counted the money and nodded. "Good luck with whatever this is." As the taxi drove away, Jane and Robert found themselves standing at the roadside, staring up at the distant mansion where Royce and his family had disappeared. "What now?" Robert asked quietly. "I don't know," Jane admitted. "But those girls... Robert, they could be my daughters. I need to be sure." Jane and Robert stood at the edge of the road, partially concealed by the ornamental evergreens that lined the property. The mansion was impressive even from a distance, a sprawling stone structure with multiple wings and manicured grounds. They watched as Royce's car disappeared around a circular driveway. "Should we call the police?" Jane asked, her voice uncertain. "Tell them I believe my daughters might be alive?" "And tell them what exactly?" Robert replied gently. "That you saw two girls who looked like they could be your daughters, with their father and grandmother? We need more than that, Jane." "You're right," she sighed, "but we can't just stand here." As they debated their next move, a white van slowed down on the road and pulled over near them. An older man with weathered features and grey hair climbed out, eyeing them curiously. "You folks lost?" he asked, his tone friendly but cautious. Robert stepped forward, offering a reassuring smile. "Not exactly. We're looking for the Calloway residence," Jane improvised quickly. "Is this it?" The older man nodded. "Sure is. I'm Ed Wilson, the gardener. Mr. Calloway called me in to deliver some special flowers for his daughters. They just got back from boarding school for their holiday break." Jane and Robert exchanged a quick glance. This was an unexpected stroke of luck. "We're from Colorado Luxury Properties," Robert said smoothly, offering his hand. "I'm Robert Nelson, the property manager. We have an appointment with Mr. Calloway to discuss a potential investment." "Bit late in the day for business, isn't it?" Ed remarked, though his tone remained pleasant as he shook Robert's hand. "We're early, actually," Robert continued with the fabrication. "Meeting was supposed to be tomorrow, but we happened to be in the area. Thought we'd check the location first." Ed seemed to accept this explanation. He moved to the back of his van and opened the doors, revealing several large ceramic pots containing exotic-looking flowers with vibrant purple blooms. "These are special order," he explained, carefully lifting one pot. Rare orchid hybrid. Mr. Calloway's daughters love unusual plants. They've got quite a collection in their sunroom. They sound like remarkable children, Jane said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ed nodded enthusiastically. Oh, they are. Those twin girls are smart as whips. Mr. Calloway says they're top of their class at that fancy boarding school in Nevada. How long have they been living there? At the boarding school? Jane asked, trying to sound merely interested rather than desperate for information. Few years now, Ed replied, arranging the pots in a neat row. They live with Mrs. Calloway Sr. most of the time for their education, while Mr. Calloway runs his business from here. Bit unusual, but I guess that's how the wealthy do things. Robert noticed Jane's hands trembling and stepped in smoothly. Need any help with those pots? They look heavy. Wouldn't say no to an extra pair of hands, Ed agreed with a grateful smile. Robert turned to Jane, speaking quietly. I'll go with him, see what else I can find out. You should call the police now. We've got more to go on. Jane nodded, her mind racing. The information from Ed aligned perfectly with her suspicions. The twins lived with Lucia in Nevada, away from Utah, and certainly far from Denver, where anyone might recognize them or question their identity. As Robert helped Ed carry the first pots up the driveway, Jane moved a short distance away, her hand shaking as she dialed 911 on her phone. 911, what's your emergency? Came the operator's voice. I need to report a possible kidnapping, Jane said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I believe my daughters, who I thought died in a house fire 6 years ago, are alive and living with my ex-husband. There was a brief pause. Ma'am, could you please provide your name and location? Jane gave her information and the address of the Calloway mansion, explaining as concisely as she could about seeing the girls at the airport, following them here, and the information from the gardener that supported her suspicions. This is a very serious allegation, the operator said. Are you in a safe location now? Yes, I'm on the public road outside the property. Please stay there. I'm dispatching officers to your location. They should arrive within 15 minutes. Can you stay on the line until they arrive? Yes, Jane agreed, her eyes fixed on the mansion. She could see Robert and Ed making their way back down the driveway for more pots. I'll stay on the line. The next several minutes passed in a blur as Jane answered the operator's questions, while watching Robert help Ed carry the remaining orchids to the house. She could see that Robert was engaged in animated conversation with the gardener, presumably gathering more information. Jane hid behind the large ornamental bush at the edge of the property, keeping the phone line open as instructed, while watching the scene unfold before her. Royce had emerged from the front door to greet Ed the gardener, dressed in expensive casual wear that emphasized his affluent lifestyle. He directed Ed where to place the pots of exotic flowers, paying him generously for the delivery. As Ed arranged the flowers, the twin girls burst through the front door, racing each other across the manicured lawn to examine the new plants. Jane's breath caught in her throat as she got her first clear look at them in the daylight. There was no doubt in her mind now. They had her honey blonde hair, the same delicate chin. Even the way they moved reminded Jane of herself as a child. Those are my babies, she whispered into the phone, her voice breaking with emotion. The 911 operator acknowledged her words, assuring her that police were en route to the address. Jane watched as Royce turned his attention to Robert, who was making a show of introducing himself as a property manager. From her hiding spot, Jane could see Royce's expression shift from polite interest to confusion and suspicion. Lucia appeared at the doorway, calling for the girls to come inside and unpack their things, but her eyes narrowed when she spotted Robert. I think I saw you at the airport, Lucia said, pointing at Robert accusingly. Royce turned to his mother, brow furrowed. What do you mean? I saw him with... Lucia hesitated, then finished with certainty. With Jane. Is this the man you mentioned seeing with Jane? Royce asked, his voice hardening. Lucia nodded firmly. Yes, that's him. Robert tried to deny it. I'm afraid you must be mistaking me for someone else, ma'am. As the group began to close in around Robert, Jane knew she couldn't hide any longer. Steeling herself, she stepped out from behind the bush and walked forward. Everyone turned in surprise at her appearance. The twins stopped their examination of the flowers, staring at her with identical expressions of curiosity. "Enough with the lies, Royce," Jane said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Jane," Royce's face darkened with anger, "what the hell are you doing here?" She pointed at the girls, who were now watching the unfolding drama with wide eyes. "Those are my daughters, my Millie and Daphne." Royce laughed harshly. "You're crazy. These are Evie and Castella, my daughters with Laura." "You're making that up," Jane countered, taking a step closer. "I don't believe you. It's too coincidental." Lucia cursed under her breath and hurried to the girls, putting her arms around their shoulders. "Come, darlings, let's go to the backyard and see the koi pond." She began steering them away from the confrontation. "You need to leave," Royce said coldly to Jane, "before I call my security team." "I know what you did," Jane replied, her voice rising. "You've been hiding them in another state with your mother so no one would recognize them. You sent men to burn down my house that night, didn't you? That's why the fire started in the nursery. It wasn't an accident." Royce's face contorted with rage. "You've been imagining things for too long, Jane. You have no proof of anything. Now get off my property before I have you removed." When Jane stood her ground, Royce's expression turned dangerous. "You'll regret this." He made a subtle hand gesture, and 4 large men in dark clothing emerged from around the side of the house, moving with purposeful strides toward Jane and Robert. "Leave the property now," one of them ordered. "We're not going anywhere," Jane replied, her voice shaking but determined. At Royce's nod, the security guards moved in. 2 of them grabbed Jane roughly by the arms while the others seized Robert. When Robert tried to break free, one of the guards wrenched his arm behind his back with excessive force. There was a sickening pop, and Robert cried out in pain. "Stop it! You're hurting him!" Jane screamed, struggling against the men who held her. Royce appeared unmoved by Robert's obvious pain. "Take them to the back room and make sure they stay quiet," he instructed the guards coldly. The men began dragging Jane and Robert toward the house. Despite his dislocated arm, Robert continued to struggle, managing to land a punch on one of the guards with his good arm. His effort was futile. The guard merely shoved him harder, causing Robert to stumble. In the distance, the wail of police sirens became audible. Royce's head snapped up, his face contorting with fury as he turned to Jane. "You called the police?" he snarled. "You'll regret this, Jane. You have no proof. None exclamation mark." The guards paused, looking to Royce for instructions as the sirens grew louder. In the confusion, Jane spotted the twins running back toward the commotion, with Lucia following behind, calling frantically for them to return. The girls seemed drawn to the sound of police car, their young faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. Despite the pain, Robert made another attempt to break free, using his good arm to try to push away the man holding him. The guard easily subdued him again, but the struggle had captured the twins' attention. Jane seized the moment. "Girls!" she called out desperately. "I'm your mother, your real mother. Your father has been lying to you all this time." "Don't listen to her," Lucia shouted, trying to catch up to the twins. "She's a crazy woman." The girls froze in place, clearly frightened by the violence they were witnessing. They looked from Lucia to Jane to their father, confusion evident in their identical faces. The police sirens were now directly outside the property. Blue and red lights flashed through the trees as patrol cars pulled up to the gate. "Everyone stay where you are," commanded an authoritative voice as uniformed officers streamed onto the property, hands on their weapons. The security guards released Jane and Robert immediately, stepping back with their hands visible. Robert clutched his injured arm, his face pale with pain, but his eyes fixed on Jane with concern. "Police, don't move!" shouted the lead officer as they approached the tense scene. "What's happening here?" demanded the first officer, who introduced himself as Captain Reeves, his hand resting cautiously on his holstered weapon. Jane stepped forward. "I'm the one who called. These men," she pointed to the security guards, "assaulted us on Mr. Calloway's orders. My friend needs medical attention." The officer signaled to his colleagues, one of whom approached Robert to assess his injury, while others positioned themselves between the various parties. "Ma'am, can you explain why you called 911? The officer asked Jane. "Those girls," Jane pointed to the twins who were now being held protectively by Lucia, "are my daughters. I thought they died in a house fire 6 years ago, but they're alive. My ex-husband took them and faked their deaths." Captain Reeves turned to Royce. "Sir, we need to see that documentation immediately." "Of course," Royce agreed, his composure returning. "It's inside, and while you're at it, I want this woman charged with trespassing and harassment." "We'll sort all that out," Captain Reeves replied evenly. "First, I'd like one of my officers to accompany you to retrieve those documents." Royce nodded stiffly and headed back toward the house with an officer in tow. "And someone get medical attention for this man," Captain Reeves added, noticing Robert's injury. A paramedic who had arrived with the additional police units approached Robert to examine his arm. Jane stood trembling, watching as Lucia continued trying to usher the twins inside. The girls were clearly reluctant, still looking back at the scene with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Captain," Jane said urgently, "those are my daughters. They were stolen from me. Someone set fire to my house to cover it up." Captain Reeves regarded her carefully. "That's a very serious accusation, ma'am. Do you have any evidence?" Jane pulled out the keychain again. "This is them as babies. Their names are Millie and Daphne. They were born on May 10th, 6 years ago. Their weights were 5 pounds 3 ounces and 5 pounds 7 ounces. Captain Reeves examined the keychain photo and handed it to Sergeant Miller. "We'll look into this, but I need you to understand, if what Mr. Calloway shows us checks out, there's little we can do without a court order for DNA testing." "Please," Jane begged, "just don't let them leave with the girls." Captain Reeves nodded grimly. "No one's going anywhere until we sort this out." The paramedic finished examining Robert's arm. "Dislocated shoulder," he announced. "We need to take him to the hospital to have it properly set." "I'm not leaving," Robert insisted through gritted teeth. "Not until we know Jane's daughters are safe." Jane squeezed his good hand. "You should go. This isn't your fight." "I'm staying," Robert said firmly. Before Jane could argue further, Royce returned with the officer carrying a folder of documents. Captain Reeves took them and began reviewing the contents. "Birth certificates," he murmured. "School records, medical files, everything seems in order." Jane's heart sank. "They're forged. They have to be." "The birth certificates are from Nevada," Captain Reeves noted. "Says they were born at Desert Springs Hospital in Las Vegas." A flicker of hope ignited in Jane's chest. "My daughters were born at University Hospital in Denver. Call them. They'll have records of my delivery." Captain Reeves considered this, then nodded to one of his officers. "Make the call. Check if she gave birth to twin girls at University Hospital in Denver on May 10th, 6 years ago." The officer stepped away to make the call, while Captain Reeves continued examining the documents. "These medical records are comprehensive," he remarked. "Vaccinations, checkups, dental visits." "All forgeable," Jane insisted. The tension was palpable as they waited for the officer to return. Robert stood beside Jane, his face pale with pain but his presence unwavering. Royce maintained his composure, though Jane could see the strain in his eyes. Lucia had finally managed to get the twins inside the house, away from the unfolding drama. Finally, the officer returned, his expression giving nothing away. He spoke quietly to Captain Reeves, who nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Matthews," Captain Reeves said, turning to Jane, "the hospital confirms you gave birth to twin girls on that date." A wave of relief washed over Jane, but it was short-lived. "However," the captain continued, "that doesn't prove these particular children are yours. The documentation Mr. Calloway has provided appears legitimate." "It's not," Jane insisted. "The details on my keychain, the birth weights, the exact time of birth, those would match the hospital records. Ask them to check." Captain Reeves dispatched the officer to make another call, this time to the Nevada Desert Springs Hospital. Meanwhile, another officer approached and whispered something in the captain's ear. His expression hardened. "Mr. Calloway," he said, turning to Royce, "my officers would like to speak with your security personnel individually." Royce's confident facade cracked slightly. "Why?" Standard procedure when there's been an altercation, Captain Reeves replied smoothly. Also, we'd like to speak with the children, just briefly. Absolutely not, Royce snapped. They're already upset by this circus. Sir, I understand your concern, but... The officer who had made the call to the hospital returned, interrupting with an urgent whisper to Captain Reeves. The captain's eyebrows rose in surprise. Interesting, he said. The birth weights and times on Mrs. Matthews' keychain match exactly with the hospital records in Colorado, but Desert Springs Hospital denied having any patient named Laura Calloway or any birth recorded on that day. He turned back to Royce. Mr. Calloway, can you explain why the birth certificates you provided show the exact same birth weights and times as Mrs. Matthews' daughters, despite supposedly being different children born to a different mother in different hospital? Colour drained from Royce's face. There must be some mistake. I don't think so, Captain Reeves said. I think we need to continue this conversation at the station, and we'll need to speak with the children and Mrs. Calloway Sr. as well. Royce's composure finally broke. This is ridiculous. You can't seriously believe her. What I believe doesn't matter, Captain Reeves replied calmly. What matters are facts, and right now the facts aren't adding up in your favor. As if on cue, another officer approached. Captain, we've separated the security personnel for questioning. One of them is requesting to speak with you privately. Says he has information about the situation. Captain Reeves nodded. Bring him over. A visibly nervous security guard was escorted to where they stood. He glanced fearfully at Royce before addressing the captain. Sir, I need protection if I'm going to talk. You'll have it, Captain Reeves assured him. What do you know? The guard took a deep breath. 6 years ago, I was hired to drive another member of our team to a house in Denver. We were instructed to take 2 infants and make it look like they died in a fire. Jane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. We manipulated the electrical system to cause a fire and planted other remains to fool the investigators. The guard couldn't meet Jane's eyes. I've regretted it every day since. Royce lunged at the guard. You lying... Several officers restrained him immediately. Mr. Calloway, Captain Reeves said severely, you're under arrest on suspicion of kidnapping and conspiracy to commit arson. As Royce was being handcuffed, Jane could only think of her daughters still inside the house with Lucia. The girls, she said urgently, please. Captain Reeves nodded understandingly. We'll bring them out safely, Mrs. Matthews, and we'll arrange for a proper DNA test to confirm what I think we all now know to be true. The next several hours passed in a blur for Jane. The police had secured the mansion, placing Royce in custody and bringing Lucia in for questioning as well. The security guard's confession had broken the case wide open, with another guard subsequently confirming the story under questioning. Jane sat in a small conference room at the Salt Lake City police station, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Robert sat beside her, his arm now properly set and in a sling, refusing to leave despite her insistence that he get proper rest. You should be at the hospital, Jane said for the 3rd time. They cleared me to leave, Robert replied patiently. It's just a dislocated shoulder. I'm not going anywhere, Jane. A gentle knock on the door preceded the entrance of Captain Reeves and a woman in professional attire who carried a clipboard. Mrs. Matthews, Captain Reeves said, this is Dr. Wilson from Child Protective Services. She's been speaking with the girls. Jane stood quickly. How are they? Are they okay? Dr. Wilson smiled reassuringly. They're doing remarkably well considering the circumstances. They're confused, of course, but they're resilient. Have you told them? Jane asked, her voice breaking slightly. About me? About what happened? We've explained the situation in age-appropriate terms, Dr. Wilson replied, that you're their birth mother and that there was a misunderstanding that separated you for a long time. Jane nodded, afraid to hope. And what happens now? We've expedited a DNA test, Captain Reeves explained. The preliminary results confirm what we already suspected. You are their biological mother. Jane's knees weakened and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. After 6 years of grief and loss, her daughters were alive. They were real. Legally, Dr. Wilson continued, there will be processes to follow. But given the circumstances and the evidence against Mr. Calloway and Mrs. Calloway Sr., the courts will likely restore your parental rights quickly. When can I see them? Jane asked, hardly daring to believe this was happening. Dr. Wilson checked her clipboard. They've actually asked to meet you. If you're ready, we can arrange that now. Yes, Jane whispered, I'm ready. I should mention, Dr. Wilson added gently, they still think of themselves as Evie and Costella. Those are the only names they've known. It might be best to use those names initially until they've had time to adjust. Jane nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. Of course. I'll wait here, Robert offered, but Jane shook her head. Please come with me, I need you there. Robert's eyes widened in surprise, but he nodded and stood to join her. They were led to another room, more comfortably furnished with sofas and toys, clearly designed for children. Jane paused at the doorway, her heart hammering in her chest. And there they were, her daughters, sitting side by side on a small sofa, their pink coats now replaced with matching sweaters someone had brought for them. They looked up as Jane entered, their identical faces curious but cautious. Evie, Costella, Dr. Wilson said gently. This is Jane. The lady we told you about. The girls studied Jane intently. One of them, Evie, Jane guessed from her slightly more assertive posture, spoke first. You're our real mom? She asked directly. Jane knelt down to their level, tears blurring her vision. Yes, I am. But you can call me Jane for now if that's more comfortable. The girls exchanged glances, sharing one of those silent communications that twins often develop. We saw the picture, Costella said quietly, pointing to the keychain that the police had returned to Jane. That's us, when we were babies. Jane nodded, carefully removing the keychain from her purse and holding it out to them. Yes, your names were Millie and Daphne then. The girls leaned forward to examine the photo, their expressions serious. I made this for you, Jane continued, gently turning the keychain over to show the back, where she had carefully sewn 2 tiny matching bears. I kept it all these years, even when I didn't know where you were. Costella, who would have been Daphne, reached out hesitantly to touch the tiny bears. You made these? Yes, Jane replied softly. I used to knit little toys for you when you were babies. Like Mr. Buttons? Evie asked suddenly, her eyes widening. Jane's breath caught. Mr. Buttons? My special bear, Evie explained. He's old and patched up. Grandmother says I've had him since I was a baby. He has buttons for eyes. Tears spilled down Jane's cheeks. I made him for you. I made one for each of you. Yours had blue buttons, she said to Evie, and yours had green, she added, turning to Costella. Mine is called Green Bear, Costella said, her voice filled with wonder. I still sleep with him every night. The realization that her daughters had kept the toys she had made them, that they had maintained that fragile thread of connection all these years without knowing it, nearly overwhelmed Jane. The police said our dad and grandmother did bad things, Evie stated matter-of-factly, that they took us from you and lied. Jane nodded, unsure how to respond in a way that wouldn't further traumatize them. They said there was a fire, Costella added, and that you thought we died. That's true, Jane said gently. I was very sad for a long time because I missed you so much. The girls shared another look, seeming to reach a decision. Can we see where you live? Evie asked. Of course, Jane replied. When the police say it's okay, I have a small apartment in Denver. It's not as big as the house you're used to, but we can find a new place if you'd like. With a garden? Costella asked hopefully. I like flowers. Absolutely, Jane promised. With the biggest garden we can find. Dr. Wilson, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward. Girls, Jane and her friend need to talk with the police a bit more. Would it be okay if you go with Officer Martinez to get some ice cream in the cafeteria while they do that? The twins nodded eagerly, sliding off the sofa. As they headed toward the door, Castella suddenly turned back. "Will you be here when we get back?" she asked Jane, a hint of anxiety in her voice. "I'll be right here," Jane assured her. "I promise I won't leave." The girls followed Officer Martinez out, turning back once more to wave at Jane before disappearing down the hallway. When they were gone, Jane finally let herself break down, the emotions of the day catching up to her all at once. Robert moved to her side, putting his good arm around her shoulders. "They're amazing, Jane," he said softly. "Beautiful and bright, just like their mother." Captain Reeves returned a short while later, his expression grave but satisfied. "We've got full confessions from Royce's security team," he reported. "Apparently, after your divorce, Royce decided he wanted the girls after all, but on his terms, with you out of the picture. He hired men to stage the fire and take the children. Lucia was in on it from the beginning. She never approved of you and saw this as a way to have her grandchildren in the family while removing you from their lives." "What will happen to them?" Jane asked, not out of concern but needing to know her daughters would be safe. "They'll face multiple felony charges: kidnapping, arson, conspiracy, fraud. Given the severity and the evidence against them, they'll likely serve substantial prison terms." Jane nodded, feeling no satisfaction, only relief that this nightmare was nearly over. "What happens now?" she asked. "With the girls?" "There will be hearings, of course," Captain Reeves explained, "but given the circumstances, the court will likely grant you temporary custody immediately, pending the formal restoration of your parental rights." "How soon can we go home?" Jane asked. "We'll need you to remain in Utah for a few more days to complete the investigation," Captain Reeves replied. "But after that, assuming everything continues to go smoothly, you should be able to return to Colorado with your daughters." Robert, who had been quietly supportive throughout, spoke up. "Jane, we'll need to cancel my client meeting tomorrow." Jane had completely forgotten about the business trip that had brought them to Utah in the first place. "Oh, Robert, I'm so sorry about that." "Don't be ridiculous," Robert replied with a smile. "Some things are far more important than property deals." Captain Reeves cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to make your arrangements. We'll let you know when the girls are ready to see you again." After the captain left, Jane turned to Robert, suddenly overwhelmed by everything he had done for her. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You've been incredible through all of this. Getting hurt, missing your meeting." Robert shook his head. "Jane, watching you find your daughters after all this time, that's worth a dislocated shoulder and 100 missed meetings. And I think, if you agree with me, we should tell the team to pull your land from the listings since you promised that girl the biggest garden. This changes things. I'd support you in rebuilding the house." He smiled. Jane studied his face, seeing the genuine care in his eyes. For 6 years she had kept people at a distance, unable to move forward while weighed down by grief. But now, with her daughters miraculously returned to her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope for the future. Jane nodded and pulled a tiny set of smile. "I agree with you." Then she paused. "What do you think it will be like?" she asked softly. "Raising twin 6-year-olds who barely know me." "Challenging," Robert answered honestly. "There will be difficult days ahead. They've had their world turned upside down, but they seem remarkably resilient, and they have you for a mother. I think you'll all be okay." Jane reached out and took his hand. "Will you help us, not just now, but after we go home?" Robert's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with emotion. "Jane Matthews, I would be honored to help in any way I can, for as long as you'll let me." A gentle knock on the door announced the return of Dr. Wilson. "The girls are asking for you," she said with a smile. "They want to know if you'll join them for ice cream." Jane stood, suddenly nervous but eager. "I'd love to." As she headed toward the door, Robert called after her. "Jane, it's going to be okay, better than okay." Jane looked back at him, a genuine smile breaking through her tears. "I know it is. For the first time in 6 years, I really believe that." She walked down the hallway to where her daughters waited, her heart full of gratitude for the miracle that had brought them back to her. and hope for the life they would build together. 6 years ago, on a cold Christmas Eve, she had lost everything she held dear. The twins she had carried, birthed and loved so fiercely, had been torn from her through an act of cruelty she still couldn't fully comprehend. But they were alive. After years of believing she would never hear their laughter or see them grow, she had been given a miracle. Jane paused at the doorway, watching her daughters for a moment before they noticed her. They were beautiful, resilient, and somehow, despite everything, they still carried pieces of the life she had intended for them. The stuffed bears she had made with her own hands had stayed with them all these years, a thread of connection that had never been severed. Jane felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. These little girls had lived another life, with different names and different memories. They would need time, patience, and professional help to process what had happened to them. There would be questions she couldn't answer, tears she couldn't prevent, and moments of doubt for all of them.